In this video, we're going to look at two big topics. We have completing the square. We're going to make sense of that. And then we're going to look at the quadratic formula. We're going to make sense of that as well. We're going to start with completing the square because that lets us understand where the quadratic formula comes from. So what's completing the square all about? Well, what you might see is something like this, x squared plus 6x. And they say complete the square. Well, what you do, and this is the procedure, you take this coefficient right here, so this is b, and you take b, you divide it by 2, and then multiply it by itself. So you multiply it by b over 2. Right, so here you take 6, you divide it by 2 and get 3, and then you take 3 and multiply it by itself, and that will give you your c term. And in fact, the c term in this case is actually a squared, but we'll get to that in a moment. So x squared plus 6x, we say complete the square. Okay, so you rewrite it as x squared plus 6x plus 9. And we got 9 because you took the 6, divided it by 2, and multiplied it by itself. So you divide by 2 and square it. So x squared plus 6x plus 9. Why is that completing the square? Well, once you've done that, this will factor into x plus 3 squared. So really all you have to look at is this constant right here, and in these parentheses it's going to be x plus the square root of the constant. And that's a nice little way of looking at this, right? It's you take this formula and this quadratic equation right here and you factor it, it will just be x plus 3 squared, so x plus the square root of the constant squared. And the reason it's called completing the square, well, there's two reasons, or at least two ways I see it. What you're doing, first of all, is you're taking a quadratic, and you're factoring it into something that's squared. And the idea is that any number squared, like 4 times 4 gives you a perfect square, or 5 times 5 gives you 25, another perfect square. So anything squared gives you a perfect square. So we're completing the square. Another way of looking at it is to think, well, if you have something squared, what would that give you in terms of, what would that be if you expanded it? If you took this, x plus a, and multiplied it by itself, well, what does that look like? Well, we distribute the terms, let's do that. X times x, and then x times a. So x times x is x squared, plus x times a is ax. And then our other term, we have a times x, and then a times a. So a times x again, it's ax, and then plus a times a is a squared. We combine our like terms, it's 2ax, and here we have a squared and x squared. Okay, so the strategy, and I think this is clever, if you want to have a quadratic that factors into something nice like this, right, if it factors into a number or term squared, this is what it would look like. It would have to be an x squared plus 2a times x plus a squared, and that's useful. So if we looked at x squared plus 6x, well, in that case 6 was equal to 2a, and then when we took 6, divided it by 2, and squared it, we get a squared. Let's talk about that for a moment. That was 9. So in this case, 9 is equal to a squared. So what's the other point of view of completing the square? Why does that work? Well, again, we're trying to get something in the form of x squared plus 2ax plus a squared, because once we do that, we know we can factor it as x plus a squared, or x plus the square root of a squared, x plus the square root of the constant squared. So how do we do that? Well, if we're given x squared plus 2a times x, and we want to get this, we need to take our 2a and use it, it's our only other a in the equation, and that's why I think this is clever, to get a squared. So we have to use 2a to make a squared. And this is how you complete the square, because to make 2a into a squared, you take 2a and you divide it by 2. right? In our example, we had x squared plus 6x, so we took 6 and divided it by 2. And that will give you 2a over 2, just gives you a. In this case, 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. And we want to make a squared. So now we've already made a. To make a squared, the next step is take a and multiply it by itself to get a squared. And so we took 3 times 3 and got 9. So we can make the square, we can complete the square by taking our b term, our coefficient of 2a, right, that's usually referred to as the b term, dividing it by 2 and then multiplying it by a for this very reason. And I think I'm going to pause for a moment and I'll save the quadratic formula for our next video.